This is a relay project.
Seriously?
Seriously starts now. Here's Supriya and Ryan.
Yo, it's Wednesday, October 26th, and you're listening to Seriously with Supriya and Ryan. I am Supriya Devetti in Toronto.
Ryan Jesperson here in Edmonton. It's nice to see you after a little time off.
Yeah, I had a busy week last week. I was in Ottawa doing a bunch of work stuff, and, thank you to the listeners for allowing us to take a bit of a pause.
Yeah, you were in Ottawa doing a little bit of work stuff. If people follow you on social media, you were rubbing shoulders with the Prime Minister, which was pretty sweet. But good to see you going up, and there's a bit of a different vibe when you're down in Ottawa walking the halls of power, isn't there?
You mean I'm not in a giant hoodie, looking like a bit of a schlub? Yeah, thanks.
No, it looked great. You had a good, not exactly time off for you. There was a lot going on, but it's great to be back with you. There's a lot to catch up on. Obviously, big election in Ontario, and I think we're still looking for people that actually showed up and voted there. We'll get to that in just a second.
Yeah, there's a lot to get into on that front. Another story that, we were sort of touched on earlier and we finally have a bit of a conclusion on is that Adidas has finally dropped Kanye West after Balenciaga and Gap had already done so. So good for them for finally taking a stand against, rampant anti-Semitism, anti-Black sentiment and general misogyny that Kanye West has been exhibiting for quite some time.
I thought that was a very sort of a generous assessment of what it's been like. It's mostly just been a tire fire, to put it in the dumb down terms of what's going on with him right now.
And like the anti-Semitic stuff, it's the world's most insidious form of bigotry for a reason, because it tends to percolate and fester. And we've seen a lot of, on the ground effects for Jewish people in the States and in Canada as well. And it's very worrying, when you are wearing like a Star of David or you're wearing a kippah and you're worried about your actual safety because you are identifiably Jewish.
Yeah. So Adidas, they estimate this is going to cost them $250 million this year. I wasn't really surprised to hear that their Yeezy line was earning $2 billion US a year, but this is obviously a decision that has financial consequences for the company, financial consequences for Kanye West, whether he cares or not. I know some people think that this is just a troll. Some people think that it's funny. Some people think it's appalling for obvious reasons. On the lighter side, on the social media side of this, I loved that Weight Watchers tweet as they congratulated Adidas on losing 163 pounds. I thought that was the tweet of the week.
Yeah, that was pretty good. I'm a big Weight Watchers fan myself. I told you right before we hit record that that's how I lost the baby weight. So, big fan generally.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you something, a story in our neck of the woods here in Western Canada. We had two conventions, so to speak, over this past weekend. The Danielle Smith and her United Conservative Party. Of course, she's Alberta's new premier. And then Alberta's NDP. As a matter of fact, NDP members across the country were having meetings, of course, and different things happening of varying degrees of consequence, but a resolution passing out of the NDP conference that we had some fun with talking about earlier this week, lowering the voting age to 16. And I've been looking forward to this Wednesday to have a chance to talk to you about that. You think it's a good idea? You think it's a terrible idea? I know you're not indifferent.
Yeah, I don't think it's a great idea. I think 16 is a bit of an arbitrary age to pick. I can certainly understand some of the arguments, and I am, somewhat sympathetic to them that in order to increase turnout, you want to lower the age. Kids should have more of a say, particularly when it comes to issues that are, like climate related and some of the more longer term issues, because, older folks aren't going to be around when the planet is decimated. So that's certainly an argument. But I don't know. I just think it's an arbitrary plucking of a number to say, OK, yeah, let's lower it. And I'd be curious to see if they form government, if they actually go ahead and implement something like that. It's kind of like when folks talk about electoral reform when they're not in power, right? They're like, yeah, electoral reform, first past the post sucks. and then they get into power and they're like, meh, it's fine.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd be I'd be curious to know like which. I think I already know the answer. That's why I'm double clutching on the question. Like, where on the what space on the political spectrum would the majority of 16-year-olds occupy? And you might suggest that they'd probably be lefties. That it might make more sense. I don't know
anymore.
But I don't know either, because when I was 16, I was a full-blown right-winger growing up in South Calgary. So I have no idea. I've seen both.
Yeah, I was definitely much more right wing the younger I was. In fact, at one point, I was a card carrying conservative. So yeah, like I don't know. And I think, when we're talking about younger men in particular, and you see some of the inroads that Pierre Poilievre has made, you saw his rallies, you saw his videos, like folks are turning out, and a lot of young men are turning out. So I don't know if they would necessarily all lean left. I think that might be a bit of a presumption on people's part.
Yeah, might be proven wrong if you were to think that. 16-year-olds, if they're if they're working, if they have a job after school, or if they're out of school, it's their choice. Of course, they can. They're paying taxes. We'll license drivers at 16. We'll put them behind the wheel of a vehicle with big responsibility there. So I don't know. I also kind of feel, as I'm saying this, that I'm just being the cheap devil's advocate, that I'm filling the role for the conversation. I don't know if I really believe it or not.
No, but what was the age for the UCP race? Like, in order to
choose? It was 14. I think it was 14. I'd want to fact check it, but I'm pretty sure it's 14 years old. You could cast a ballot for the leader of the party, which was casting a vote for the next premier of Alberta. So I saw, a political blogger by the name of Dave Cornwaya. He does a great blog called Dave Berta that people can check out, and he was joking about that as the United Conservatives were poking fun at the idea of the NDP resolution around voters 16 years of age having a say in the next provincial election. They're saying, and this coming from the party that allowed 14-year-olds to choose their next leaders. So I don't think that was the first example of hypocrisy in politics that we've seen. I'm pretty sure it wasn't.
Well, let's end on a really positive note here, because the UK has really good news, as they've solved all of their racism now that Rishi Sunak is their PM. So
congratulations to the UK.
Yeah, just like America solved racism with the election of Barack Obama, the UK did it.
Oh, so that must have been so exciting for everybody in the US when they finally solved racism back with Barack Obama. Hey, what do you make of what we know of this? He's sort of one of the lesser known global leaders right now, of course, but there's a lot of buzz around the UK's new prime minister. A compelling guy appears to be. He's vowed, after meeting with King Charles III and receiving that invitation to form government, he's vowed that this will be a government of repute, a government that will not embarrass the British people. This coming from the third prime minister in 2 months, as the opposition has pointed out.
Yeah, like, go to an election, man. Like, I don't know. They've now, to your point, third prime minister in a very short period of time. It doesn't seem like they have a great mandate, which I know we're going to get into a little bit later in the Ontario specter, but it just seems like odd that country is operating the way it is, at least from afar. And, they are coming down on a pretty big cost of living crisis. Cost of energy is going to skyrocket. And I feel for the people in the UK who are going to feel that pinch.
Yeah, if you're Rishi Sunak, though, and you're not 100% certain that you're going to win an election, why in the hell would you call one if you didn't have to?
Oh, of course not. Yeah, exactly.
Give yourself some time to figure it out. We see that, of course, with the leadership changes all around the world. Supriya, before we get to our lead, I want to remind people, if you're looking to provide high-stakes training in a regulated industry, if so, you already know that high-quality training is a non-negotiable. So if you're a regulator, an association, a licensing body, chances are that you're providing training that is absolutely essential for protecting the public. And that's a big deal. You're training our nurses and our engineers and our safety professionals, our police, and more. So your organization needs more than an LMS to achieve your training goals.
And the good news here is that we know training is so much more than just an LMS. They provide everything from instructional design to course hosting and distribution, from a powerful e-commerce engine to best-in-class bilingual learner support, and will help your organization scale your content to a larger audience of learners. They've helped organizations grow their training offerings into $3 million in revenue and slash failure rates by 68% to unleash confidence for learners and regulators alike. We Know Training specializes in high-stakes training for regulated industries, and they're your one-stop solution to provide training that matters. You'll be in great company with success stories from We Know Training partners like the Liquor and Cannabis Regulatory Branch of British Columbia, the Alberta Hunter Education Instructors Association, and the College of Midwives of Ontario.
If you want training that truly makes a difference to your community and your revenue growth, get in touch with We Know Training. You can visit them online right now at weknowtraining.ca to learn more.
The Lead.
We've come so far over the past 8 years, but we have unfinished business that I'm absolutely determined to see through. We've made so much progress on getting transit and housing built and growing our economy. And now we have a strong mandate to continue with that progress. And that is what I asked for, a strong mandate, and that is what I have been given.
So that was the mayor of Toronto, John Tory, there, claiming that he has a strong mandate. But let me ask you this, Ryan. If turnout for a race was less than a third of the population, would you consider that a strong mandate?
Well, what is a strong mandate anyway? The whole voter turnout thing, I've never really been able to wrap my mind around it. It's sort of the same as political approval numbers, you know? Like if a politician is polling in like the low 60s among the general public, people will say that's fantastic, right? Yeah. But as a high school student, bringing your marks home to your parents, the low 60s, I don't know. I didn't really ever get much celebratory. Yeah, you're shaking your head. I feel like I dug deep into something there. Did I hit a nail on the head there with you?
Maybe.
Yeah.
I don't think I would have ever been able to bring a mark in the low 60s home. But,
so what is a strong, what is voter turnout? If you look at it, Ottawa was kind of like the shining star, and that was under 50% turnout with eligible voters, right? Like 44%. Toronto, like you said, less than a third. It's about 29%, the numbers show.
Yeah, and so I have these numbers up here. So to your point, Ottawa 44%, Toronto 29%, Brampton 25%, London 25%, Mississauga 22%, and Kitchener 21%. So
21%.
Yeah. So Toronto's not an outlier in terms of having low voter turnout. And, I was digging at Mayor Tory there for a little bit, but what else would you expect him to say, right? No candidate's going to go out there on victory night and basically go, well, I won, but I have no mandate. So back to the drawing board, right?
He's like, wow, I can't believe barely anybody showed up for them. Wow.
Yeah, exactly. So a win is a win. But it's, I don't know, we can get into a few of my worries about what this could possibly mean. But let me ask you first, as somebody who, I assume you don't celebrate Diwali. I don't mean to make assumptions, but
let's not make assumptions here.
But, the municipal elections in Ontario were held on Diwali, and there are a lot of folks that are making the point that perhaps that was a pretty big factor in lowering turnout. Now, my own view is that I'm sure it didn't help, but I don't know if that explains a 21% turnout in Kitchener, right?
I don't know. I mean, a friend of mine was working in Brampton, helping out with the campaign out there, and he was devastated. To be quite honest, we've got a group chat, and he was texting. He was sort of updating us through election night. All of us had been wishing him and his candidate well, and he said that he was at a polling station in a neighborhood in Brampton with a high sort of East Asian population, and he basically said around the supper hour. I'll never forget his message. Well, I might forget it one day, but he said basically, "There's no lineup. There's nobody here. He was devastated, and so I don't know, Supriya. Do you think? I mean, I don't think Diwali was the number one problem contributing to low voter turnout, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was a factor, maybe especially in particular communities or particular cities. Do you think so?
Yeah, so I mean, you mentioned Brampton. I think that obviously would have played a factor. Parts of Mississauga obviously would have played a factor. Parts of Toronto as well. But I don't know if that explains the wide across the board low turnout numbers. And this gets me into my more worrying sort of point. Is there something else afoot? And Kate Graham, who is she's a political scientist and is a former candidate for the Ontario Liberal Party. She ran for the Ontario Liberal leadership the last time they had a race as well. Very well regarded, very, very smart. And she pointed to the fact that there are, if you look at trust scores across the board, whether you're talking about media or government or politicians, like institutions more generally, those are plummeting, those numbers. And I don't want to draw any hard conclusions based on one set of data, right? This is just one municipal election that we're drawing conclusions from. But if those trust scores are plummeting, right, and if voter turnout is the way it is, and if it continues to trend downward to this degree at various levels of election races, what does that mean? It kind of like that to me is much more worrying if people are tuning out to the point because they think the system is rigged against them, right? And that's a message we hear often from Pierre Poilievre in the Canadian context. Not that the system itself is rigged, but that our institutions are rotten and there are gatekeepers that are trying to keep you down. But I mean, Bernie Sanders in the States, his whole shtick was that the system was rigged and everyone was out to get him. Like that kind of messaging after a while, I feel like kind of poisons the entire chalice a little bit.
Yeah. I was talking to Stephen Punwasi about this, of course, who was running for mayor in Toronto, and he was telling us that he deems his campaign to be a success because he just wanted to put issues like this on the radar. He just wanted to start conversations like this. And one of the comments I made to him on Real Talk was that you can't. I can't look around and conclude that young people, and by young, let's say like under 55 or most especially under 45, that they don't care about what's going on, because you have no choice but to care about things like rising interest rates and a super hot housing market that's now cooling. And what does this mean for whoever? There's implications everywhere. People's costs are rising on all fronts, it seems. So I see people that care because it impacts them on a daily basis. And so I guess one of the early conclusions that I draw, and I'm still trying to wrap my mind around it, Sapri, is that people simply don't see elected government, or that in this case municipal governments, or maybe all the way through, as the mechanism for them to be represented, or as the mechanism for change. And so even if you care very deeply about the fact that you're having to stretch further than ever to make your payments every month, or to keep your head above water, but you still don't show up to vote, then what does it say? It has to be that people don't see their elected officials as the ones that they turn to, or the ones that can help them out. I mean, am I taking a step too far in drawing that conclusion?
No, I mean, I don't think so. I mean, what I will say is that if you're, working multiple jobs to keep your head above water, then you probably don't necessarily have the time to be super plugged in, right?
Sure.
Or nor do you have the bandwidth to be able to do that. You may not have an employer who's letting you off to go vote as well. But to your point, I think that's quite right. I think people don't necessarily see elected representatives or our institutions or government, however you want to qualify it, as being the solutions to their problems. And to a degree that's understandable. But if we have large segments of the population that are just completely tuning out, and that's bad. That's bad for all sorts of reasons. And I think that our elected leaders, need to do a much better job of bringing people back into the fold.
Yeah. Hey, can I ask you? I want to circle back to the Diwali thing. Regardless of whether you're Sikh or Buddhist or Hindu or whatever. I mean, we've seen that's right now. That's this election that we're talking about. This Ontario, these municipal elections. But we've seen elections in past and recent memory. I think just a few years ago, an election in Canada on a Jewish high holiday.
Rosh Hashanah, I think. Yeah,
my pal I was telling you about, he said you'd never hold an election, you never run an election through like Christmas, like a Christian holiday, so to speak. Do you think that efforts should be made to keep? It's not like, and people will say, well, there's so many world religions, how are you going to do it? Or there's so many, but not really. There are still pockets on there are plenty of options through the calendar year where none of the major religions are celebrating the very significant observations that they do. Do you think that that's something that should be considered as a factor when elections are being scheduled?
Yeah, I could, sure. I think that's especially if you want to increase voter participation or voter turnout, right? Like, I think you can avoid having an election on one of the Jewish high holidays. You can avoid having an election on Diwali. But if you're talking about Hindu holidays in general, I mean, there are a lot of them. Like Diwali is obviously like the big shebang, right? But there are a lot of them out there, and so I do think you get into a little bit of okay, well then this date, it can't be this date, it can't be this date, it can't be this date, and it has to be within a certain time frame. There are also like mandatory voting days, right? Like a fixed election period,
like fixed election periods. Yeah. I just think that, like, I guess just bigger picture thinking, and I don't think that this comes across. I hope it doesn't come across as conspiratorial. I don't think so. But the optics around, like, the big words to use, like voter suppression. I don't know. Just optically, I just wonder if there are considerations to be made there.
Also, there's this.
So, Ryan, have you been paying a lot of attention to the inquiry into the invocation of the Emergencies Act?
Define a lot. No, I've been, I think, like, maybe a little bit more interested than the average Canadian, but just barely. Like, I understand the magnitude of the significance of invoking the Emergencies Act. I recognize why the public inquiry is important. The story obviously resonates with Canadians. The idea of the occupation and the takeover of downtown Ottawa, etc. But with regards to the nuance of it, if I'm being honest with you, I'm still trying to find the hook on something that would make me really, really care. Is that fair?
No, that's more than fair. So just to give our listeners a bit of a rundown, there is a lot of information that is coming out of the inquiry. And so in the last few days or so, what we found out is that the head of the RCMP, Brenda Lucki, sent an email before the EA was invoked, like literally the day before, saying that not all tools had been exhausted. So not, totally great for the feds on that front. The OPPs, the Ontario Provincial Police, did basically a 180 in terms of their intel assessment, because the OPP commissioner back in March told a group of MPs that his force's intel had concluded that the convoy posed a threat to national security. But then his own head of intel told the commission that they never received any credible info to that effect. It turns out that the Ottawa police, for their part, relied on a Rex Murphy column to make all sorts of ridiculous conclusions about the convoy that weren't credible. OPP intel also said back in February that it was likely that foreign adversaries were fueling or may have tried to take leverage or advantage of the protests for their own agenda. There were over 500 charges that were laid in Ottawa during that time. But the big story from the last, I would say, latter half of the last week and into this week is that Premier Ford is fighting testifying. And last week, he was asked about whether or not he was called upon to testify. And this is what he had to say.
I have not been asked again. I want to repeat what I said earlier. We have top officials from the OPP that were running the operation with conjunction with municipal police agencies and the RCMP. Our police did an incredible job. They were very peaceful. They moved forward. And I am so proud to stand here and back our police right across this country and right across this province. I'll always support our police. They're professional, they're polite, and they ended up getting the job done. Thank you.
So a little bit of a discrepancy there in terms of, what came out in terms of the commission being like, well, what are you talking about? We asked him to appear. Now, from Ford's perspective, his office did say that he was asked to voluntarily come instead of officially testifying. So there's a bit of nuance there. But I mean, let me ask you, as Ryan, as somebody who's watching this from Alberta, what do you make of Ford not testifying?
Yeah. I mean, as the province that proudly sent hundreds of trucks east, Supriya, of course, convoy talk in Western Canada is a little bit different because that's where a lot of although I won't, you know what? It's not like there weren't trucks from Ontario too. Maybe Canadians could share the blame on this one.
Yeah.
Can I, the one thing that's jumping out at me, honestly, and help me understand this, like I understand that the Liberals the RCMP operates at arm's length, but there is some connection, obviously, between, for example, the federal government, the Liberal government, and Brenda Lucki, but for sure. But for the top cop in Canada to say that there were, what was her exact words again? There were basically other options on the table. There were things that had not been leveraged. What was her phrasing?
Not all tools had been exhausted.
Not all tools had been exhausted. Can someone explain to me how that reflects more poorly on the government than it does on the police? It's an emergency. It's a huge problem. What do you mean? What do you mean? Not everything has not every corner has been explored. Not every avenue has. What are you talking about? Why not? I don't understand how that falls more in the lap of the politicians than it does the police.
I mean, that's a great point. And I think that's my main takeaway from all of this and watching a lot of what's been coming out of the inquiry is the fact that the police really dropped the ball here at various levels. And essentially, that's why the feds had to step in. On the question of Ford, though, it is worth noting that he is raising a bit of an interesting question as to whether or not he actually can be called to testify because of parliamentary privilege. And, we don't need to get into the super heavy details of that because legal eggheads will battle it out. But I think it's a question worth asking, and there's merit to that, whether or not you agree with it or not. But just on the political optics for Ford, I don't think there's a real win for him here in any way, right? He said before he wanted the Emergencies Act. He said he supported the feds for that. And he was standing shoulder to shoulder with the prime minister and the federal government. And he doesn't like being the bad guy, right, Ford? So I don't think he wants to go up there and basically seem as though he was not being as supportive towards the police as he said in that clip. And I think it's also worth noting that Ford himself has also been the target of a lot of, vicious anti-vax rhetoric. They showed up to his house to protest multiple times throughout the pandemic. His then health minister as well had protesters show up in front of her house. And, I've said this before to you, Ryan, but Ford doesn't suffer from the same level of brain worms, algorithmically induced brain worms that other conservative politicians tend to suffer from, Pierre Poilievre or Danielle Smith or whatever. So as much as he backs police and truckers and whatever cliched demographic that conservatives have to back, right? I think he doesn't actually believe a lot of the lunacy that the convoy was pushing. Paradoxically, that is bad for him politically if he were to go up and that were to come out in very blunt terms. Yeah,
I'm also not convinced, and this is maybe something that, I don't mean to dismiss the subject matter. I'm not. It's important, and obviously it was an event, quite frankly, in Canada's history that was quite significant, but I don't think the average person is paying attention to this, and I'm not convinced the average person cares. I think that the Canadians have two positions on the convoy, and that's either fuck yeah or fuck off. And I'm not sure that anybody has changed their mind on that due to this inquiry.
Seriously?
So, Ryan, did you see the Environment Canada statement that, so they put out two statements. First, they put out a statement the day of Diwali basically saying that there's going to be fireworks and it's Diwali and it's going to lower the air quality around certain areas. And, this time of year, air is stagnant, yada, yada, yada. And so it's going to be bad. A lot of people were mad about that because it's not like they put out these statements on May 2-4 weekend when there are fireworks or on Canada Day when there are fireworks, right? So it seemed to be singling out my people for their festive nature. And then Environment Canada put out a statement later in the day, maintaining the air quality stuff, but basically taking out any reference to Diwali and fireworks.
Yeah, they're like, due to factors we can't quite put our finger on, there's a special air quality statement in place. It's one of those things that whether or not it's true or accurate, it's not always the best thing to put out there for public consumption, right? Is this it?
Well, like yeah, and if it is true, then don't back down either, because that's my other thing. Like, if the air quality is in fact going to be worse because of fireworks or patakas, like the firecrackers that my people tend to light, then go ahead. But it just seems weird that we don't have those sorts of statements for other holidays, and so I get I don't know. I very much get the reaction, and like, to your point, if it is true, then stick with it. Like, I don't know.
I'm trying to think of what's another equivalent that we could, in good faith, that we could consider here. Would it maybe be something from land management officials or environmental lobby groups? Due to the Christian holiday of Christmas, our landfills are filling up with wrapping paper and bows and discarded dead Christmas trees. Thanks to the Christians, our landfills are becoming more of a problem. Yeah, is that kind of the equivalent on this one? I don't know. Maybe that's it. But yeah, maybe, I don't know. Hey, what about fireworks in general, Supriya? Like whether it's Diwali or Canada Day, like you said, or a touchdown scored at a professional football game or what have you. I'm just paying attention to what people are saying around me. It seems like fewer and fewer people are cool with fireworks. I wonder if 20 years from now, if anybody's going to be shooting them off anymore.
Yeah, that's a good question, because I've noticed that too. People mention that they, disrupt their pets, they disrupt newborns, right? If you
migratory
are suffering
birds,
from, yeah, exactly. Pollution, yada yada. So like, there's a lot of, I guess, cons for fireworks generally. The pro is that they're nice to look at,
and they're awesome. And the pros are
fun.
that they're awesome.
Yeah.
Hey, this is not totally related, but we were at a football game, the Edmonton Elks BC Lions last weekend. Me and my little guy, 7 years old. It's Military Appreciation Night, Canadian Forces Appreciation Night, and at the end of the national anthem, should have seen it coming. 2 CF-18s come flying in just right over the stadium and buzz the stadium. And it put my little guy, my 7-year-old, into a kind of a bit of a wind wobble. He was a little bit rattled by it. I think just by the major experience that a fighter jet brings, a few hundred feet above you. But I also saw some chatter on social media that really made me think, and it was the first time I'd seen this regarding flybys, as they call them, or flyovers, and that was someone, or rather several people, quite critical. Commonwealth Stadium in Edmonton, Supriya, where it is around that neighborhood, there are high populations of refugees, of immigrants, of new Canadians, and I had never thought of something like that as something that could be quite triggering or quite traumatic from someone, for example, that had fled a war zone, where that sound or that experience could really take somebody to a very difficult place. These are the things that I think it's more important for us to talk about now than ever before. And so whether it's fireworks or flyovers or things that we've done in celebratory contexts, maybe it's time we rethink all of it.
Oh, you're just adding to cancel culture now.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get people thinking and talking about our podcast. If what we're talking about here is resonating with you, you got to tell your friends about it. Supriya, people can follow us on Instagram at SeriouslyPod and on Twitter at Supriya and Ryan.
You can also check us out on our website, seriouslypod.com, and you can always email us at talk@seriouslypod.com.
I will see you next Wednesday.
Looking forward to it.
Seriously is hosted by Supriya Dwivedi and Ryan Jesperson. Technical producer, John Hicks. Executive producer, Josh Dunford. Account coordinator, Lawrence Terlego. General manager, Katie Cook-Shivers. Human resources, Lena Shepard. Voiceover by me, Tangi. Seriously is a relay project. For more, check out seriouslypod.com.